Good morning. Apologize about yesterday. I had some things to get completed at the school for the upcoming school year. My children started school today. All four of them are in school now, and it is a crazy thing for us. So we went out, my daughter and I went out to eat, and my wife and I went out to eat, and I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do with ourselves now. I have my phone up. I have the Facebook page up. And if you wish to reach me, you can do so on any of those platforms to ask me questions or ask anything about today's Bible study. So I've got it all there. You can go to the Facebook page and comment on the Tuesday morning Bible study page. You can text me. You can put something into the YouTube stream if you have any questions about anything we're going to study today. We are on to chapter 26 in Proverbs, and it's a strange chapter. I'm just going to call it a foolish chapter because we're going to talk a lot about fools. And I think one thing we should remember in the book of Proverbs is that when the Lord talks about a fool, usually there's another chapter where he talks about wisdom and a young man, and a young man is beckoned into what is he word? It's not the wisdom. It's he doesn't use the word desire. He uses, I don't know if it's foolishness either. But the idea is that immorality, worshiping other gods, sexual desire, all these kind of things, they are a harlot who is beckoning men, and in men we understand just people, right? To their doom. Almost like the Iliad and the Odyssey, when the sirens were beckoning sailors to their doom, that whole thing. Whereas wisdom, is something harder to follow. So a fool is not just someone. We might think right away that a fool is someone who's this is about intelligence. It's about someone being dumb or having lack of wisdom, these kind of things. Because, like someone may not have the computer in their brain, right, that can calculate and crunch numbers and come up with answers, but they might have an abundance of experience and wisdom. So that it's not, I think sometimes we get the idea of intelligence, like the sheer computing ability of your brain versus maybe the experience that you have. That would be wisdom, knowledge versus wisdom, intellect, these kind of things. A fool, I think in a biblical sense, is someone, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So a fool is the opposite of that. The fool is someone who chases after false gods. A fool is someone who is in the sight of all the wisdom. To the contrary, they follow false gods. Like all the things that God has done, they would still follow false gods as opposed to follow Yahweh. Doesn't make a lot of sense. And then, of course, a fool, because they are foolish, because they don't follow wisdom, because they don't follow God, they do foolish things. And because of a lack of wisdom, a lack of knowledge, a lack of intellect, however you want to phrase that. But I think the primary understanding of a fool has to do with a religious reasoning, not necessarily an intellect one. So the Proverbs for today are going to deal extensively with the foolish, with fools. That's why I'm going to call it a foolish chapter. Okay. So starting with 26, Proverbs 26, verse 1. Okay. And I'm reading an ESV. if you are reading another translation and you hear something come out that's interesting, by all means text me and let me know if you have a different translation that's good. Okay, so 26 chapter 1, I'm sorry, 20 chapter 26 verse 1. Like snow in summer or rain in harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool. This is a classic under a version or example, excuse me, of Hebrew poetry. And the poetry is in the comparison, in the metaphor, in the extraction of meaning by comparing these two things, which I think has no small bit to do with why rabbis in the future then, and probably even now, we don't have any data to back that up, but we know that later on Jesus and other rabbis would often teach using parables, and the parables often would compare one thing to another. In fact, Laura, my wife, just led a VBS with other volunteers from the congregation. It was based on the parable of the hidden treasure, and Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like, right? So that's, if I remember my English language right, that would be a simile, but I think it's more of a metaphor because you're comparing one thing to another, and they don't. I think the reason you go with metaphor is because there's not a lot of meaning if it gets too far away from the original thing, right? So comparing the kingdom of heaven to a treasure that's hidden in the field, I think those things are disparate enough where you would call this a metaphor for one thing stands in place of another, right? So this is Hebrew poetry, is comparing one thing to another, like snow in summer or rain in harvest. The second one being farmer people, being a rural people, having some connections to it still, that's pretty understandable. Rain during the harvest is just the worst time you could ask for rain. And I think my dad really helped me understand this, even though I didn't spend a lot of time on the farm. I was a little kid when we were farming, and we left when I was still a little kid, so I don't remember a lot. But my dad raised dairy cattle, and he would put hay up for the dairy cattle, small bales. We used to throw those small bales back before. It seems like everybody's gone to the big round bales now, and they use machinery to do it. But we would haul and throw and stack small square bales, okay? Now, a problem would be is you would cut the grass or alfalfa, whatever you were growing, and then you'd let it lay, and you'd want it to dry out before you baled it together. Because if you bale it all up together when it's wet, it gets moldy on the inside, and it ruins it, right? So what might happen is you might go out and harvest that whole field. You want to cut all that grass down, you rake it into rows, and then you bale, and then you leave it in the rows to dry. But rain keeps falling on top of that hay that's been raked up in the field, and you can't bale it when it's wet. This is a classic example of rain before you harvest, great. But rain during the harvest and rain after maybe you've cut things and you're laying in the field, terrible, right? So we have kind of a love-hate relationship with rain. It can, in Breckenridge, when we were there as my first call, rain was difficult in a different way. The sugar beet harvest, eventually the sugar beets would be ready to be harvested, and the plant, it would get cold enough where they could start stacking beets. So then the call would go out and the beets would need to be harvested. But if rain came down extensively during that time, the fields would be absolutely muddy and impossible to get in and out of. It would make it really difficult. So rain during the harvest, pretty simple to understand, is the last thing you'd want, is the opposite of good. It's bad. It's really just not good. And then snow in summer, well, that makes sense. In fact, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but a really strange thing that's happened this year is that China has had summer snow twice. And China has a special relationship to summer snow. You may not be aware of, but whenever China gets summer snow, they have a tradition, or what would you call it? A not tradition, but a way of looking at it, a cultural thing, where whenever snow falls in the summer, it's because of some great injustice. Some injustice has been done, and so snow is just, a sign, a crying out that and justice has been done, and it hasn't been dealt with, right? It hasn't been made right, which, China, especially what they've done to the Uyghurs this year, putting them basically in concentration camps, it makes a lot of sense. They got snow in summer, and of course, what it does is, you get a cold enough, down in Florida, they always worry about getting a frost when the oranges are starting and when the oranges are getting close to harvest. It's the opposite of what you want. Sometimes we'll put in our gardens in the spring, and then we'll get a hard frost that can kill all the things that have come up, right? So you don't want cold or snow coming down in the middle of summer when it can really cause problems to the things that you're trying to raise. And this context of this word for summer, so we have a different maybe understanding of summer because we've moved away from kind of our rural background of farming, but this really means basically the time of year where crops are growing, right? So getting snow when your crops are growing, that's bad. So you compare these two things, like Alanis Morissette, isn't it ironic? Like rain on your wedding day, things like that. But this is exactly it, right? We're getting things when they shouldn't be happening, and so honor is not fitting for a fool, right? If you see a fool with honor, it doesn't make sense, or it shouldn't happen, or it's bad. A fool getting honor. So in other words, a fool shouldn't get honor, I think. And then the other thing is true, that when you have someone who has honor, i.e. maybe position, title, maybe they're the king, maybe they're a lord or someone higher up, and they're a fool, that's the worst place you'd want a fool to be, in a place of honor. Kavod is here. So that's the kavod is for honor is also the word used for the glory of God, the kavod of Yahweh. Yeah. So this kind of glory. So I think it does have to do with it, maybe a sense of position, of title. Like it's not just necessarily honor of a regular person, but perhaps a really terrible situation is someone who has the honor of leadership and they're a fool. And we've seen that, we have some pretty foolish people as Congress leaders. We have some pretty foolish people as presidents. We have some pretty foolish people as local magistrates, governors, leaders, and it causes all sorts of problems, right? You need a wise, discerning leader for things to go well. Let's go on. Like a sparrow in its flitting, like a swallow in its flying, a curse that is causeless does not alight. Okay, that is a really strange translation. So we have here a curse what? That is causeless, or we have here maybe a better way of saying it, a curse without cause, right? Does not alight, shall not alight. Okay, so this is an interesting proverb, okay? This word for alight is basically does not. It's a word for to go in, to enter in, to come in. Okay, or you hear there's another word, come upon, fall upon. Okay, so the flitting of a sparrow or a swallow. Sometimes these birds fly around. It's seemingly without cause or without order. They just kind of do whatever. They're easily startled. They easily jump up and they fly. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of sense to it. So this word for the flitting, that's a good one. To shake, to waver, to wander, to move to and fro, to flutter. And I think, here later on, there's a meaning to wander aimlessly. Okay, so the sense that this flitting is that the birds are kind of taking off and just there's no order, no reason why they're flying or what they're doing, right? The sparrow and I've seen this. We've had barn swallows occasionally cause problems at the house, and they'll go into the garage, and then they have no sense of how to get back out of the garage, even though the big door is open. They can't figure it out. They fly around like crazy. There seems to be no order, very little wisdom or understanding. I mean, they're animals, of course, that makes sense, but just the idea that there's no thought or clarity behind it, right? So, like a sparrow and is flitting, like a swallow and it's flying, a curse that is causeless, or a curse without cause. So you would usher down curses for no reason on someone. And this is a really dangerous thing. This is why on TV we have all sorts of things that are okay to say, like profanity has gotten kind of a walk. It gets to have free reign on TV. But there's still one thing that people don't say, and it's still edited on, at least on network TV, right? Like the over-the-air channels. When you say God, DAMN, you, right? So the reason why it's so offensive is not the profanity. It's that you're literally calling God to damn this person to hell. I think over the years we've lost sight of what that is, because it's used in we have used it in media and in common language. We've lost sight of what it actually means. You're calling down a curse that God would send someone to hell forever. I mean, it's a terrible thing to do. And people who get angry, people who lose their temper, and they call down a curse like this on someone for no reason, right? A person who is cursed at should not be worried. What's going to happen with this curse? Well, it doesn't mean anything. It's like a sparrow flitting. It's like a barn swallow with no order. There's no cause for this curse, and therefore a person shouldn't worry about what's going on, right? You can't. This has everything to do with like the second commandment: "Shall not take the Lord God's name in vain." Calling down curses, using God's name improperly in witchcraft and other things, and then using it the wrong way. But there's no power in it. The scary part is that there is, if done in the right manner, done by the right person, and done under the auspices of God. Like, so we see in the Old Testament that there are times where there are curses cursed, things like that, and they mean something. But not here. Anyone who has no cause to make a curse, it doesn't mean anything. Okay, a couple more verses, and then we'll go on to Micah. This is a good one here. A whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the back of fools. This is a great example of what a parable is, right? So the writer wants you to understand a concept. And what does he do? He offers you two concepts that you already understand. So you have this, the whip for a horse, bridle for a donkey. These concepts you understand because you've experienced them. You know them, right? The donkey can be a very stubborn animal. Sometimes, I'm not going to comment on modern practices with animals. Like, sort of in a biblical context, in the 11th century BC or whatever, they would use a whip to make donkeys do what they're supposed to do. And this is a common practice in culture. We understand that. Like, okay, donkeys are stubborn. You've got to get a whip to get them to do the things you want to do. Whip for horse, a bridle for the donkey, so the donkey will go where you want to. Bridle is a thing that's put in their mouth. It has reins where you can actually make the animal go where you want it to go. Because again, donkey can be stubborn. A horse, perhaps, a horse maybe when it's tired or when it doesn't want to run as fast as it should, or when it's pulling something and is being lazy, sometimes needs to be whipped in order to keep it going. We've gone on horse rides where horses have, they're basically these really. I've gone a couple of horse rides. I mean, I used to ride horse, but I've gone on rides where this horse has walked the same trail like a couple hundred times or more, right? So you get on that horse, and it doesn't matter if you pull to the right or pull to the left or try to make it go faster or slower. That horse is not going to do anything except what it's been trained to do those 200 times before. Horses then will need to be perhaps might be whipped in order to get them to break out of the way they're doing things, right? So we use the meaning for the 2 points of contact that we understand very clearly, then to describe the point of contact with one that we might not understand, right? So just as these two things are clear enough, these animals need a certain amount of boundaries and pushing in order to get them to do what they're supposed to do. So a fool needs to be apparently swatted on the backside with a rod from time to time in order to do what he's supposed to do. Okay. Now I'm really curious. Okay. So a whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod. Yeah. So it's got a vav here. So a rod can, a vav can be, it's a conjunction usually for the word and then it could also, I guess, I think have been maybe or. It could have been like, so it could have shown maybe some contrasting, or could have just said it's just another link in a logic train. So and is probably a good translation, right? So a whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the back of a fool. And I'm curious about this rod word. Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay, so this is the same word, or at least it is used in the Bible in context of being a shepherd's instrument, right? So your rod and your staff, they comfort me, right? So the same word, an implement, a tool of a shepherd, the shepherd's crook, in order to get the sheep to go where they want. And sometimes there's a little nudging in the backside of sheep to get them to go where they're supposed to go. So it's pretty interesting here. You could even make a comparison. I think that there's two. You could take it two ways. Number one, literally, this rod is a fairly so the word is a fairly generic word. It takes on a subset of meaning because shepherds use them, and so we kind of categorize it over there. But it can also just be a rod that's used to, sorry for lack of better words, beat stubborn animals, things like that, or even clubs used to beat other people, right? So it's not that the word isn't generic. It's just that there's a subset of the word that has very much to do with shepherding, but it also can just be a rod, a staff, a branch, an offshoot, a club, a scepter. It has a lot of different meanings. So I think then with the fact that rod has these generic meanings as well as specific meanings, we could take two meanings from it, right? A stubborn fool needs to be spanked on their backside with a rod, or I don't know if you grew up when I grew up, they still had a paddle. They never used it because they probably couldn't have, but I had one teacher, a male teacher in grade school, who he had a thing called, he called it Big Red. And he had holes drilled in it and the whole thing, and it was about yay thick, and he kept it hanging in a closet. And every once in a while, when the class would get out of hand, he would open up that closet just so people could see it. So this kind of idea of like a paddle for a fool, right? Kasim. And then, so the word is fool, stupid fellow, a dullard, a simpleton, an arrogant one. It's frustrating too. I don't like it, and I'm not arguing for corporal punishment. Don't get me wrong here. Sometimes we run into people in this world who just they can't be reasoned with for whatever reason. Maybe perhaps their upbringing, how they're brought up, perhaps some mentalities and personality things within them that they just push and push and push until they're pushed back. I don't know what it is, but we run into these folks in the world. Not that we're the ones doing the punishment, just we can see it. That this is usually what happens: is you get someone who pushes until they receive this kind of punishment. And not that it's good. I don't mean to glorify that punishment because it's probably learned behavior that's bad, but it's just like they push until they hit a boundary where the physical punishment comes, and then suddenly like, okay, well now I know that's as far as I can go, and then I'll operate within this. They're looking for consistency within a program or a subset that they learned at home, which, I mean, again, not saying that it's good. It just happens that way, right? So I think it could simply mean corporal punishment for a fool, but we could look at it as our, as our own sinful selves too, is that we can be stubborn and obstinate at times. And the Lord has to use his shepherd's staff, the law, to routinely come along our backside and straighten us out, right? I think we can understand that really well, especially the part about, a bridle for a donkey. We can be very stiff-necked and stubborn. Um, yeah, no, I think I was just getting there when you probably wrote the comment, right? Yeah, I'm sorry. Christy Eden just put a comment on there about it being law and gospel. I think that's a fair thing to say. I'm not sure if it's necessarily here in the back end of this prophet, like specifically, but I think because Christ, when he comes, he teaches both law and gospel, and he clearly teaches us how to use law and gospel, right? He calls out sin, he makes sin very clear, he calls people to repent, and then when people repent, he forgives them. So he clearly does law and gospel, and he clearly shows us this is how God thinks. Um, I'm not sure if you want to necessarily say like it's very clearly written here, but I do think that this is how the world works, right? This is just how the world works. That the Nazis rise up. What happens? They get their comeuppance in the end. Bernie Madoff got his comeuppance, right? I mean, like, so the law comes, the staff, the rod comes for everybody eventually, right? You act a fool, eventually the staff will come for you too. And I think that's a concept that is definitely talking about law and gospel. If you're transgressing the law is going to come down and crush you. The problem is, are you going to turn to the gospel or not? Are you going to be given the gift of the Holy Spirit to under the crushing weight of the law, look to Christ and see the forgiveness that's there, and then turn away from our sin? That's a bad way to say it. Repent of our sin, right, and then receive the gospel promises. I don't know, but I do think it's pretty clearly there. Verse 4, maybe one more verse, and then we'll head on to Micah. Okay, these full ones are really interesting. They're full of stuff. Answer, verse 4, chapter 26. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. So I think verse 4 is not saying that we don't answer. Okay, so what it's saying is how we answer. Answer not a fool according to his folly. Let's take a look at the Hebrew here. Answer a fool. Okay, yeah, see the Hebrew actually makes more sense this. Oh no, I'm in chapter 4, verse 4. Yeah, lo tana, which is do not answer, right? A fool according to his folly. According to, that's a strange word. Okay. So really, it shouldn't be necessarily according to. That's a translation. Very, very woodenly, very roughly, it would be like, do not answer a fool his folly, right? And then we would fill in English stuff to kind of make sense of that concept or that chunk of text. So do not answer a fool according to or because of or in regarding to his folly. Because there is a preposition here. Yeah, the key. This is a good one. Yeah, there's a key there. But I can't, for the life of me, I can't remember what key. I think key, if I remember right, key is like because of or due to. So according to his folly makes sense. Yeah. Do not answer a fool according to his folly. Now, the thing I can't make sense of here is if it means the translation here is tough. Does he mean do not answer a fool like a fool, right? So don't answer back to a fool in the same kind of foolishness. In other words, don't, in an English sense, in a modern English sense, don't when your opponent gets down into the mud, don't get down in the mud with him, right? Don't lower yourself to his argument or his way of arguing, right? Your opponent gets into the mud rake, don't get into the mud rake with him. Right? So is that what I mean? So do not answer him like according to in the same way as his folly, which makes sense. Then we say, lest you be like him, right? That makes sense. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Right. So then the thing that's interesting is that verse 5 is the opposite of verse 4. So it's an answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. And it's the same word both times. It's kasil, ki volat, volavike, something like that. That's the according to his folly. So kasil will be a fool. So it's like answer a fool his foolishness, or because of his foolishness, or for his foolishness, or according to his foolishness, and then do not answer a fool according to his foolishness. I feel like the verse 4 is getting at don't answer your this fool, don't answer back in the way that he's being foolish. I think Steffi's on to something like the same level of anger, or the same level of foolishness, or the same level of lack of wisdom, maybe the same level of acting against God, being, whatever the case may be. Just don't answer like him, because the second part, lest you be like him, right? Makes a lot of sense. But then it's followed up. You might think that perhaps that might lead someone, verse 4, to be silent. I think the answer is no. Don't be silent, because answer a fool according to his folly. Speak to a fool according to his foolishness, or answer, ane. Yeah, so this is tane, which is the same word. It's for ana, which is to answer, right? So answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So if no one ever answers, if no one ever says anything to him about what he's saying or what he's thinking or what he's doing, he's going to he's going to think he's right. In other words, we don't let. Could this not be more appropriate in the world that we live in right now? There's a lot of dumb things being said on a regular basis. A lot of what, as our president might call it, fake news, or things being said that have no background, no sense. This one gets me. The idea that it's okay to burn someone's shop down because they have insurance. Then we're finding out that a lot of these people, like there's this one African American fellow who had just opened his shop, put all of his money into his shop, and then someone burned it down because they said, well, he's got, they looted it first and then they burned it down. And so, well, he's got insurance, they'll take care of it. It's just this sense that someone else is always going to take care of this situation. I can do what I want, I can act how I want, because someone else will take care of it, right? It's a stupid answer. Where did personal responsibility and liability go? Why are we so willing to let someone else answer for our problems or what we've done? So I get this, right? If if we don't stand up against foolishness and speak wisdom, what the world has done is it's taken wisdom and it's really flushed it down the toilet and made us feel terrible. So we listen to the Ten Commandments, and we listen to, especially now, Christ's teachings about turning the other cheek and love your neighbor even when they hate you, right? These concepts, the Ten Commandments, along with Christ's teachings about being a loving Christian person, are what built Western society. Okay? 2,000 years of Western society, and now we're just going to flush it all down the toilet because it's old-fashioned and it's based on biblical truths. It's based on the Word of God. If it's based on the Word of God, it can't be enlightened or it can't be helpful. And that's just a lie. The Ten Commandments and Christ's wisdom from the Gospels give so much. Think of it in a vacuum. You put a subsection of humanity on another planet, let's say, just as a hypothetical situation. Put them on another planet, they have nothing. They have no upbringing, they have no wisdom, they have no writings or readings, right? They are probably going to be somewhat chaotic, and it's going to be a hard place to be. Then you give them the Ten Commandments and the teachings of Jesus, and perhaps they don't even read them as necessarily religious, i.e. this is for salvation. They just read them in terms of just their wisdom alone. Ordering a society along these lines would give a lot of order that normally wouldn't be there. So there's wisdom in the text in and of themselves, even putting aside the salvific stuff that goes along with it. We need to not be afraid of speaking out the truth of the scriptures, of the Ten Commandments, of God's word, because it really is wisdom. And especially now, we say things like, it's okay for a man to be married to 3 wives, 4 wives, whatever, polyamory. And everybody knows, no one wants to say the truth. Like, everyone knows that these women have hopes, they have dreams. They looked at this man and they thought they were in love, and they wanted to be in love with this man, and so they made concessions. They made sacrifices. They kind of gave up a lot of stuff because they thought they were getting something that wasn't really. And anyone from the outside of the picture can look at the situation and see every one of these women are not happy. It's clear as day, and this doesn't work. But no one wants to speak the most obvious truth because we're so afraid that someone might jump down our throat and say, well, that's your truth. You're applying your truth to our truth, and that's not. You can't do that. You're a bad person. Whatever. It's truth. And we called this thing a long time ago. We used to call it common sense. But truthfully, it is God's word that's been given to us. I honestly don't think we would have common sense without God's word, without wisdom from the scriptures. We wouldn't know what is a very simple, wise thing to do. I've gone off on that probably too long, and so we'll probably just cut it off there because I'd like to spend a half hour each on Proverbs and Micah. Let's turn to Micah. Okay, we're getting close. We talked a little bit about the origins of Micah when we started the Bible study. Micah is judgment for the most part against the rich, the powerful, the lords, the people with power in Israel. And the story is this, that they've done evil against the widows, the orphans, the poor in the community. They've treated them poorly. So God is going to punish them. He's going to send them off into bondage, which he does. They go, Judah and the people of Jerusalem go off into bondage into Babylon, eventually under the time of during and after the time of Daniel, during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, they do return, but that's a long time they spend in bondage in Babylon for their sins. It's a very simple thing when you really think about it. God doesn't like powerful people, and God doesn't like rich people, and God doesn't. Well, no, the reality is God brought you all out of Egypt by a mighty right hand. And then he turns around and says, don't ever treat sojourners, widows, orphans, the poor amongst you, because you were once poor. You were once, sojourners in a foreign land, and I brought you out. I put you in the promised land, and I made you a people. Right? I'm the one who did these things, God says. Don't ever turn around then and treat your fellow brothers and sisters, your fellow people of the Holy Land, as though now you can do these things because you have this power. Well, no, all power comes from God, and God doesn't want these things to happen, and yet God's people do these things. That's the great irony of people being angry at the church and hating the church, is that it's the church, it's the people of the church, it's not God. If you want to point to the terrible things that the church has done, and I would actually say that mostly those things are overblown, but things like the Inquisition, not a good time for the church, and other, the times of the Reformation, not great times for the church. These problems were created and happened because of God's people, not God. God's people are sinful. They do sinful things. They do dumb things, right? But God is good. God is just. He's righteous. He does righteous things. So anyway, we are on, let's see here, chapter 7, verse 11 through 17. We covered, I think, 8 through 10 last week. God is now reassuring the people of Israel who are going to go off into bondage that eventually they're going to come back, and God's going to do good things for them. So this is a chapter that has definitely to do with, we've gotten past the law. God is now speaking to his elect, to his remnant, the people who have remained faithful even in spite of all this stuff, and he's promising them good things. He's promising them gospel, right? So we can read about gospel today, verses 11 through 17. Let's begin. Verse 11, a day for the building of your walls. In that day, the boundary shall be far extended. So, what is a wall but a protection, something that brings peace, comfort, knowing that we are safe behind the walls? Now, I don't know, thinking about the second coming of Christ, the Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, the holy city being amongst man on a new heaven, a new earth, right? So when they return, one of the very first things they'll do when they return from Babylon is to rebuild the walls. I think this has a real life prophecy and fulfillment in history. The Israelites return. The first thing they do is rebuild a temple. Then they rebuild the walls of Israel because when they return to Israel, it's largely been destroyed, and they're kind of out there in the middle of the wilderness. They're at the whims of marauders and bandits. There's not a lot of protection to be had there. Living out in the Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity is a little bit like being a pioneer out in the woods in America. It's not a safe place to be. There are roving bands and things. So rebuilding the walls is a big priority. It does happen. The walls are rebuilt, and the people celebrate. So first it's the temple, then it's the walls, then they rebuild the royal palaces too, which you may not think is all that important, but that's a longer story. Suffice to say, they rebuild the royal palaces as well. Okay, but the beautiful thing that's going to happen is, in that day the boundary shall be far extended. And now that doesn't happen. Israel, for the most part, after its return to Babylon, becomes a vassal state of first Persia, then the Greeks, then the Romans. And there's some short periods of time where they fight off their oppressors and they're free for a bit, but the powers that be that are attacking them, that are controlling them, are much larger, more powerful. So there is some self-rule there for a while, but there aren't long stretches of self-rule. So the walls, definitely a prophetic fulfillment. The boundary being extended, I don't think we can see a prophetic fulfillment in. We are on Micah 7, chapter 7, verse 12. Okay. So I think this is referring to the new heavens and new earth. that, well, and then Christ's ministry, when he comes, he preaches this message of the gospel. It begins to move outwards, and then Pentecost comes, and all the people from around the world are coming to Jerusalem to pilgrimage to the temple, and suddenly they receive this message from Peter about Jesus, and the gospel suddenly expands all over the place. And then during the apostolic period, it keeps expanding further and further out. So if we look at a wall as the outer edges of a kingdom, what God's saying here is that there's going to come a time where the boundaries that are Israel are going to extend way further than they ever have been. Now, in Israel, it might see us as being like, oh, well, we're finally going to be a nation that's as big as Egypt and Babylon. But I think how we as Christians should understand this is that the gospel is going to go out into the whole world, and the boundaries of the good news of Jesus Christ go everywhere throughout the whole world. Okay? 12, in that day they will come to you from Assyria and the cities of Egypt, and from Egypt to the river, from sea to sea, from mountain to mountain. There's a lot of things we could point to here. Isaiah talks about Mount Zion and everyone streaming, all the nations of the world streaming to Mount Zion on the last day, where the Lord will dwell and he will teach his people. Some of these places, like Assyria, would be modern day Iraq. Yes, it does. The book of Acts talks about the restoration. Yeah. Assyria would be modern day Iraq, the cities of Egypt to the river, from sea to sea, from mountain to mountain. So, I wonder if verse 12 could be kind of seen, in that day they will come to you. I almost wonder if this is maybe even a prophecy about Pentecost. That the people come to Israel. Because remember, we're not talking that far back about, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, it talks about earlier, it talks about the people of the city being taken off into bondage. I'm trying to find the place where then the Lord talks about them coming back from bondage. And I'm not seeing it, but I guess we could assume that from maybe verse 11 and also the context of chapter 7. So, a prophecy made in the New Testament, then, these people coming to Israel, to Jerusalem, to hear Pentecost preaching, or we can look at it as, in that day they will come to you. This is the last day. All the believers in God who trust him and call upon his name will be gathered together on the last day. And they come from all over, which definitely would be going along with verse 11a, or sorry, 11b. In that day, the boundary shall be far extended. Right? So the reach of God's kingdom will go way farther than just the geographical borders of Israel. Okay. Now, verse 13. But the earth will be desolate because of its inhabitants, for the fruit of their deeds. Verse 13, as opposed to, I think we might understand. I want to look up the Hebrew word here real quick and see if this is eretz. Give me just a minute here to look it up. Micah 7. Okay. We have 7 verse 13. Okay. So we have, and yet shall be, so Hinene, right? The land. Yeah. Haaretz. So when you read Old Testament Hebrew, what you get a sense of is that whenever you have eretz, it's a generic word for land, and usually eretz is in combination with the goyim, the Gentiles. So when we see this, and yet the land, the earth, right? I'm wondering if it has a connection to the peoples that live there, right? The earth, yeah, we have inhabitants of the earth. Eretz can actually be interpreted as inhabitants of the earth. I think that's what we have here, right? Yeah, because of its inhabitants there. Yeah, because those who dwell in it, Shanae, Haba Eso, something like that. To dwell, sit, abide, right? So we're seeing a restoration, OB. We're seeing a restoration of the land, God's people, the new heavens, new earth. But the old earth, the Eretz, the inhabitants, non-believers, the people who don't come to trust and believe in God's will and His reign and creation, they live in a desolate land, as opposed to the people of God. Why is it desolate? Because their deeds, right? Their deeds, their evil, wicked deeds, don't bring forth any good fruit, so the land is desolate. That's an interesting thought, isn't it, too? I mean, really think about that for a second. Our deeds could have something to do with the fruit of our land. We might have more connection and more ability, more to do with the world around us than we give ourselves credit for. It's interesting. Okay. Yet the land shall be desolate because of those who dwell in it and for the fruit of their deeds. So the people are wicked, their deeds are evil. Okay. Now we're going to switch gears. We have God showing compassion to Israel. We got enough time? Let's try to jump in a little more. We'll see how much time we have left. Shepherd your people with your staff, the flock of your inheritance, who dwell alone in a forest, in the midst of a garden land. Let them graze in Bashan and Gilead, as in the days of old. I think this is a prayer. This is a cry. This is, maybe something that the people of God are asking for, right? Shepherd your people with your staff. Let it be as it was of old. So the Bashan and Gilead, these are well known in the history of Israel of grazing areas, right? District east of the Jordan, known for its fertility, that's Bashan, which was given to the half tribe of Manasseh. And then so we have, Bashan and Gilead? Let them feed in Bashan, in the midst of the Carmel, in the midst of oh, fun. Okay. So Carmel is the word, but its translation is garden land, a mountain on the Mediterranean coast of northern Israel, just below Haifa, a town in the mountains of the west side of the Dead Sea, south of Hebron. So this is a wooded land that was quiet and solitary, as in the days in the how we got here. So we graze in Bashan and Gilead, in the midst of. So it separates them up. In a woodland solitary. So like on the foothills of Mount Carmel, in this wooded, peaceful area, let them eat and dwell and graze. In the areas of Bashan, which is this fertile area east of the Jordan, and Gilead, which is a mountainous region on the west of the Jordan, there's a plateau, and there must be good grazing land there as well. Okay, as in days of old. So maybe even thinking back to the time of Abraham, right? He's shepherding his sheep in the area of the promised land, and his flocks grow exponentially. It's a good place to raise sheep. It is a place that God has blessed, and so may like modern day reference, modern day understanding. Can we go back to the 1800s, the 1920s? When these romantic times that we elevate and we think about. They probably weren't, the 1920s, 1940s especially. You were terrified of getting polio any day of the week, and in the 1800s, you still had problems with, typhoid and typhus, and you die of diarrhea. I mean, we romanticize these time periods because they were times when we had faith and we trusted in God above all things. So it's okay. It's pointing to. I don't know if it's pointing to a time. Like we would point to times. This isn't pointing necessarily to a time. It's pointing to a place, an idea. Let us go back to those places where God fed us, took care of us. He prospered us on the mountainsides. We felt safe and protected, right? Maybe let us go back to when we were children and we sat in our parents' arms and listened to the preacher preach and sang the hymns. We felt safe and protected and didn't worry about anything, right? It's a good thought. As in the days when you came out of the land of Egypt, I will show them marvelous things. So one thing I've been talking about in the Psalms class is that the root metaphor for Israel in the Old Testament is Exodus. Exodus is their gospel. God's doing miraculous things, just like Jesus is doing miraculous things in the Gospels, right? God is doing the 10 plagues over Egypt. He's opening the Red Sea. He is providing manna in the desert, and just a number of other miracles. Him coming down and dwelling on Mount Sinai, and the thunder and brimstone and all that kind of stuff. This is their root metaphor. So when they talk about a time of power, a time of glory, a time of majesty, God doing great works, they'll point back to Exodus. And I think that's what's going on here. As in the days when you came out of the land of Egypt, this is an Exodus reference, right? I will show them marvelous things. So let us go through a second Exodus, right? Let us come out of the land of Babylon and now see similar things that we saw then. Let us experience those miracles yet again, and the power, the majesty, the glory of God. And truly that's going to happen, because Jesus comes. One of the very first things he does is he goes out into the desert and he fasts 40 days and 40 nights, and he becomes Israel reduced to one. And now God is leading Israel. Jesus, literally, he's leading himself through this ministry, through the work, and he's doing these miracles and majestic things just like God did during the time of Exodus. And not to mention that God didn't do miracles in the Old Testament besides Exodus anyway. This is late history in the history of Israel, so a lot of those things are in the past, not necessarily in their future. In their future, they are waiting for Christ to come and do these things again, sometimes even more so. I think in certain ways Christ does the same miracles of God the Father, but he does them even more powerfully and majestically and amazing. Feeding the 5,000 with a few loaves and a few fish. Almost as more the wedding of Cana. Just shows that Jesus is definitely on par with his Father in terms of what he can do and the miracles that he does. Right? He has the same powers, the same abilities. He is omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing. Okay, verse 16. Let's do 16 and 17, then we'll be done for the day. Okay. The nations shall see and be ashamed of all their might. They shall lay their hands on their mouths. Their ears shall be deaf. They shall lick the dust like a serpent, like the crawling things of the earth. They shall come trembling out of their strongholds. They shall turn in dread to the Lord our God, and they shall be in fear of you. So I can't help but think about, if I can find it here real quick. How many of you sang, I remember the number, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Um, I thought I knew the number. Apparently I don't. I thought it was 321, but you know what? That's probably the old. Blue hymnal. Okay. Lo, I'm looking for "Lo, he comes with clouds descending." I want to sing one of those verses. Yeah, 336. All right, well. So, "Lo, he comes with clouds descending" is an Advent tune or hymn, and it's talking about, in Advent, we always talk about Christ returning on the last day because we're preparing ourselves for him to come at Christmas, but we're also kind of mentally preparing ourselves and reminding ourselves that he's going to come again on the last day. So Advent is a time for us to think about these thoughts of Christ coming on the last day because he is coming on Christmas. So verse 2, right? Every eye shall now behold him, robed in glorious majesty. Those who said at naught and sold him, pierced and nailed him to the tree, deeply wailing, shall their true Messiah see. And then it talks about, how when we see him, I love how it talks about the things that we'll know, so it talks about recognizing Christ and seeing him and knowing him. We don't talk about his facial figures or his height or his weight or anything like that. We talk about his scars. How we know him? We'll know him by the still his dazzling body. Those dear tokens of his passion, still his dazzling body bears. Pierced and nailed him. With what rapture gaze we on those glorious scars. So we'll know him by his sufferings, the servant, what he primarily does. I think this is exactly what we're talking about here. We don't see a prophetic realization of this prophecy in the Old Testament or the intertestamental times. There is no time where the nations, the strongest nations of the world, weep and gnash their teeth because of the Lord returning, maybe in his pillar of fire, pillar of cloud, after the Babylonian captivity. So this is definitely a prophecy about the last day. Okay. Now there was a time where, like, the people of Jericho were afraid inside the city of Jericho of the people of Israel as they're coming out to fight against the city. So this was a historical thing especially during the conquest and during the latter chapters of Exodus, right, and Deuteronomy, Numbers. But it's not something that we see, kind of after the time of Solomon at all. No one's really scared of Israel after that point in terms of the nations of the world. God does do things like the angel of the Lord comes out during the time of Hezekiah and wipes out Assyrian commander. Well, I can't remember his name. Basically wipes out the Assyrians and their army. So God did do things like this, but not kind of in this manner and consistently, right? So I think this is talking about the realization of all things in the last day. Christ returns, and the nations shall see and be ashamed of all their might. And I think "there" here is not the might of Israel or the people of Israel, but the might of the Trinity, the God who is the God over Israel and all the God's people, his children, right? Now they here, the nation shall see and be ashamed of their might, God's might, the might of God, right? There's a thing called plural of majesty in the Hebrew language, where if God is often referred to in a sense of, especially in the sense of like um, majestic, powerful, miraculous things. The text will literally describe God as a plural, even though usually God's described as a singular pronoun, which is, when we know the Trinity, we understand the Trinity in terms of Christianity. Not that hard of a concept to wrap our minds around, right? This the tri-person, tri-Godhead, one true God, three in one, one in three, right? The nations shall see and be ashamed of all their might. Now the they here switches gears. They is the nations, right? The nations shall lay their hands on their mouths, their ears shall be deaf, right? So almost, what was it? See no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil, right? The three monkeys. So we got two of them. So they'll lay their hands on their mouths, their ears. Let's look up some of these words here. This is interesting. Um, very simple word for put, right? Just like it's a Hebrew word for placing or setting. It's just really simple. Could be more clear. So they shall put yad, their hand, all peh, over their mouth. It couldn't be more straightforward. The words literally say that. Their ears. This is an English word. Shall be deaf. Okay. So it looks like there's a word here to a meaning. So to cut in, to plow, to engrave, to devise. This is a general meaning, but there's a secondary meaning. To be silent, be dumb, be speechless, be deaf. Okay. To remain silent. So the nations shall put their hands over their mouth. Their ears shall be apparently in this call imperfect third feminine plural of this means their ears shall be silent. Right. Their ears shall be like made silent, which would be an understanding of being deaf, right? They can't hear, they can't speak. They shall lick the dust like a serpent. I'm guessing it's the same word used for serpent in the Genesis 3 account. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm guessing there's not a lot of words for serpent. To shrink back, crawl away. So they're going to, they shall lick the dust of the earth. They shall crawl like snakes of the earth, right? From their holes, caves, right? Let's see here. They shall come trembling out of their. Okay, yeah. So they shall crawl from their holes of God, right? Crawl from their holes of God. They will be afraid, right? Um, yeah, they shall turn in dread to the Lord our God. They'll come out trembling. This is interesting. Oh, okay, yeah. So the word for crawl is to tremble, quake, rage, quiver, be agitated. Um, so like, I think the context is that the idea they put here, they shall come out trembling, right? So, and then this one has they shall crawl. This word is basically like trembling or shaking out of their holes, from their holes, because there's a preposition for of from. There's a maim here, so their holes from their holes. So this idea they'll come out of their holes trembling, right? Which is a good translation here. And then they shall turn in dread. So and then of Yahweh our God they shall be afraid, and they shall fear because of you. Yeah, and they basically, yeah, they shall be. So yeah, they use afraid here twice. and it is, you can use fear for this word, but dread is probably better. Be in awe of, dread of, right? So they shall be in dread of Godway, and they then the second word is yara, which is definitely a very simple translation of fear, right? So the translation is probably pretty good in our ESV. They shall turn in dread, or they'll look upon God in dread, right? And they shall fear God, fear you. The preposition we could, or the pronoun we could put God back in there as well, Yahweh. So they will turn in dread to you. They shall be afraid of you. So really quickly to close, why would we take joy and pleasure in people being afraid? Well, these are the same people who have been laughing, pridefully, boasting over Israel, because Israel's always been small. Israel's always been kind of thrown to and fro between the powers of Egypt and the powers of the Mesopotamian Valley, the various powers that grow up there, right? They're always at the mercy of these other nations. They're small, they're disrespected, they're disregarded. So they're looked down upon, they're made fun of, they're mocked, they're treated poorly. And all these people then, these enemies of God, enemies of his people, enemies of his land, will someday quake and shiver in fear, because the God of this land that we thought nothing of is truly God over everything. He's powerful, and he is in control of everything. We shouldn't have, mocking God's people is mocking God. He doesn't take kindly to it, right? So I guess what we're saying here is there's vindication. Anybody who's been bullied knows that vindication is a sweet thing. To be vindicated, either the person who bullied you is punished, or sometimes you've been accused of something you did not do, and then you're vindicated of that thing, and you are cleared of these charges. It's a sweet feeling. That the sad part is, especially in the world we live in, accusations last forever, and you can be proven right in a court of law. This poor guy who makes cakes, right? He won his court case, and almost a month after he won his first court case, he goes back, and then he gets taken to court again by a similar person wanting similar things, and they're going to keep taking him to court until the legal fees grind him into the dust. So on paper, our legal system looks, in America, right, in the United States, looks like it's good, and that it honors all people, and that all people have rights. But here's the thing: you have equal rights under the law, but you're going to pay for it. I mean, you are innocent until proven guilty. You have a right to prove yourself right, innocent in the court of law, but you're going to pay a lawyer in order to get that done. And so these people know that. They know that they're wrong. They know that they can't win, but they know that the legal fees will eventually crush you, and you won't be able to defend yourself anymore. So even though on books, on paper, our legal system looks very just and right, justice isn't always there for everyone. Whereas with God, vindication comes, and it comes completely, and it comes so that you're made right, not only in a legal sense, but in a public sense. Because you might like win in court. You might be, the jury will say not guilty, but you'll still carry a stain. That'll never go away. And what God's going to do is he's going to, on the last day, he's going to line up all the sheep and the goats, and he's going to say, you were wrong. This person was right, and this person was righteous. They listened to my word. So that vindication and judgment will be a welcome thing that we don't really get a lot of in this world. So I know it's hard sometimes to take joy in other people being afraid and other people being judged, but God means for you to be vindicated in the eyes of all people of the world. It's important for him. You trust in him, and for some reason to God, it's very important that the whole world knows that you backed the right horse. I am glad to be with you today. We're almost to the end of Micah. We have just this last little bit, steadfast love and compassion. We'll crack that off next time, and then maybe we'll just focus on Proverbs for a while. Maybe we'll jump into another book. I don't know, but I'm glad to be with you. Glad you guys could join us today. The Lord's blessings on the rest of your day, and may the Lord give you peace and wisdom.